political talk show on the planet. Do you remember Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy? Mike Lindell had an impressive story of being a recovered drug addict who turned his life to Christ that I still choose to believe, but Mike Lindell pumped $3 million into building a social media platform that was supposed to compete with Twitter back before Elon Musk owned Twitter, when it was still a site of censorship and cancellation. He put $3 million into this new social media platform. He collected hundreds of thousands of names of new signups, and on the day that it went live, of course, it crashed. The guys who charged him $3 million told me it had been hacked by the Chinese, but my sources tell me otherwise. Then he went on an election integrity crusade. He had a huge election integrity conference where he promised the world that he would produce definitive evidence that the 2020 election was stolen, paid some former intelligence agents almost $2 million, but even Steve Bannon, his buddy, criticized Mike for not being able to produce the goods. Well, now Mike Lindell, whose pillow empire went bankrupt, is running for governor of Minnesota, an office that, quite candidly, I think he is the one Republican who probably cannot win based on polling. But what I find interesting is that his position on immigration, when he announced his candidacy in December of 2025, he said he favored strict enforcement, focusing on opposing sanctuary policies, supported border security and ICE cooperation to remove criminal illegals. He would protect resources for citizens and legal residents. If you're here illegally, he said, now's the time to leave or you will be sent back. Then President Trump endorsed him about a week ago. Now suddenly, Mike Lindell has a new position. Now he's saying that he favors a one-time 6-month registration window, a moratorium for any non-criminal illegal to stay in Minnesota, conditioning on expiring work visas. You have to be fingerprinted and background checked. This is a political flip-flop I would never have expected from Mike Lindell. But then Mike Lindell has disappointed me before when we learned that Steve Bannon was the subject of 1,900 emails exchanged with Jeffrey Epstein, who had been working closely with Epstein to rehabilitate his public image. Well, Mike Lindell continued to associate with Bannon. So I guess I should not be surprised. Anyway, the House Judiciary Chairman, Jim Jordan, has now referred special counsel Jack Smith. Jack Smith is the special counsel who ran the raid on Mar-a-Lago and essentially was the key man in the tsunami of lawfare in which they tried to destroy Donald Trump. They tried to break him financially. They tried to keep him off the ballot. They tried to put him in jail. But now Smith himself has been referred to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution. I used to think that the Russian collusion hoax was the greatest single dirty trick in American history, the greatest single abuse of power in which the full authority of the United States government was utilized for strictly political purposes, utilizing, in this case, 2 pieces of totally fabricated evidence, the so-called Steele dossier. That was a report which falsely alleged that Donald Trump, while visiting Moscow as a private businessman, had dallied with Russian prostitutes. It was paid for by Hillary Clinton and was a complete fraud. And also the still false claim that the Democrat National Committee was hacked by Russian intelligence and that those emails were spirited over to WikiLeaks was the underlying claim of the charges against me. There's no proof of that whatsoever. In fact, I wanted to introduce expert testimony and forensic evidence which would have proved definitively that the Democrat National Committee was never hacked by the Russians or anyone else for that matter. In any event, we now have evidence that in a letter that Chairman Jim Jordan wrote to the acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, that Smith made knowingly false statements under oath before Congress in his December 2025 congressional depositions. Smith was grilled about the Biden-era Arctic frost operation that unconstitutionally subpoenaed the phone records from more than a dozen Republican members of Congress, complete with gag orders so that the targets wouldn't even know that the deep state was watching them. When asked whether he or members of his prosecution team ever accessed the content of those privileged text messages, Smith claimed they had not. But the new DOJ documents prove that claim is false. This wasn't a paperwork error. This was a calculated effort by a Biden-appointed special counsel to spy on elected Republicans and associates of the president, including yours truly, to then stonewall Congress and to cover his tracks. Now, they charged me with making false statements to Congress, but although I did make misstatements, none of them were material. In other words, I had no motive to lie. I made errors, but there was no Russian collusion to lie about. There was nothing to cover up. That was definitively proved when a federal judge ordered that Robert Mueller's final report, long redacted and hidden from my lawyers during trial by the judge and the American public, but released on November 3rd of 2020, proved definitively that they had found no evidence of Russian collusion, WikiLeaks collaboration, or any other crime on my part, and any misstatement I made was inadvertent and immaterial. Not so in the case of Smith. Smith's team didn't just dig into January 6th. The infamous Fedsurrection on January 6th served as a dastardly honeypot to ensnare Trump-supporting election integrity activists. Then they went after the private communications of the people's elected representatives. That is, by the way, the very definition of lawfare, using the justice system as a political weapon against the opposition. These details prove that the weaponization of the DOJ under Biden was an assault on the Constitution itself. When a prosecutor lies under oath to Congress about spying on lawmakers, he isn't just committing perjury, he's undermining the separation of powers, the very foundation of self-government. In other words, one branch of government should not be allowed to spy on another branch, particularly the elected branch of government. In any other era, targeting the political opposition with secret surveillance and then lying about it under oath would be treated as a betrayal of the highest order. So I believe the appropriate charge here is treason, and that Jack Smith has abused his authority in what was now, I think, the greatest single abuse of power in American history. Will anybody be held accountable? Well, that remains to be seen. Jim Jordan sends a lot of letters. The Republicans are very good at sending hot letters. I remember when 29 FBI agents stormed my home at 6 o'clock in the morning to arrest me for the first time nonviolent crime of allegedly lying to Congress. The late Lindsey Graham got huge headlines by firing off a letter to the FBI director demanding to know who had approved this raid on my home. The FBI never answered the letter, but the late Senator Graham got his headline. Republicans seem to be very good at launching letters, strongly worded letters. They don't seem to be too good at holding people responsible. Meanwhile, the Democrats already eyeing the 2028 presidential field, and the early numbers are not good for the chances of ending MAGA and retaking the country. A brand new poll from the University of New Hampshire shows that radical New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, better known as AOC, is actually leading the Democrat primary with 22%, with former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg behind her, I say that lightly, at 21%. Meanwhile, former Vice President Kamala Harris comes in at a pathetic 5%, when you consider that she spent literally billions of dollars running for president in the last cycle. That's really extraordinary. The party's two top prospects seem to be AOC, the self-described democratic socialist who once declared capitalism irredeemable, compared ICE detention centers to concentration camps, and said America is governed by fascists, and Pete Buttigieg, the LGBT stalwart who claims racism is physically built into some of our highways, he said that as transportation secretary, floated gender equity crash test dummies, and on national television refused to draw a clear line against late-term abortions that I think you could call infanticide. These are not mainstream leaders. This is the far left's dream ticket. which will alienate swing voters, I think, in crucial battleground states who still believe in borders, energy independence, and plain old common sense. While Democrats chase these socialist fantasies and take identity politics to its extremes, I think Republicans are consolidating around serious contenders like Vice President J.D. Vance, who leads the Republican side in that same New Hampshire poll with 36% of the vote, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who runs strong at 28. After years of open borders, inflation, and cultural chaos, it is a time for the American people to show they have no tolerance for the radical left and their toxic, unpopular, self-destructive policies. If AOC and Buttigieg are the best the Democrats can offer in 2028, I would say their prospects look bleak indeed. But the old Democratic Party, the Democratic Party of John F. Kennedy, the Democratic Party of Harry Truman, the party that believed in capitalism, free enterprise, a strong national defense, an anti-communist Democrat Party, a party that believed in God, that party literally no longer exists. And the takeover of the Democrat Party by the radical socialists is complete. This is the other point, I guess, here is that AOC may opt not to run for president. She may run for the United States Senate in the Empire State, in which case, well, I think Chuck Schumer would be toast in the Democrat primary. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. We'll be right back with more on the other side. Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Everyone who is my age knows exactly where they were and what they were doing when they heard that President John F. Kennedy had been shot and killed in the streets of Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. I would go on to write a New York Times best-selling book about it. Right now I'm working on a book about the attempted assassination on President Ronald Reagan because if you file a Freedom of Information request with the federal government, everything you get back is completely and totally redacted, telling you nothing whatsoever about John Hinckley Jr. and the attempted assassination on Ronald Reagan. I've learned much about that, and I'm going to release the book shortly. The United States Secret Service is warning that the threat environment surrounding President Trump and other protected officials is the worst that the agency has ever experienced. Officials say that roughly 10,000 threat cases have already been logged in 2026. That's a 40% increase from the same period last year. This is why I have added the safety of President Donald Trump to my rosary every night. There have been not one, not two, but I count actually 4 attempts on the president's life. I'm still not satisfied with the official explanation that Thomas Matthew Crooks acted alone in Butler, Pennsylvania. But I do recall that same feeling in the pit of my stomach that I felt when Kennedy was shot, when they tried to kill Reagan and when they attempted to kill Donald Trump. There have now been multiple violent episodes at protected sites. Instigators have also acknowledged many serious security failures during the Butler, Pennsylvania rally. One attendee, Corey Compentori, a firefighter, was killed and others were wounded. What really aggravates me when I go online is when some people say, well, this was all staged by Trump, or some people say staged by Roger Stone. That's particularly offensive. A man was killed. That is indisputable. How it is that the state, local, and federal law enforcement were all on different radio frequencies and could not communicate with each other, how they missed more than 100 individual reports of a man on the roof with a rifle and a rangefinder is a little hard to understand. Also, their failure to conduct a drone surveillance. The local police actually offered to do it for the Secret Service. The Secret Service declined, but then the Secret Service couldn't figure out how to get the drone technology that they had licensed to work. There was actually a Secret Service agent on the 800 number with the manufacturer of the drone technology trying to figure out how to get it to work. I think America has to confront this political climate that helped produce this danger. For years, a Trump derangement media culture has portrayed one man and tens of millions of his supporters like me as fascists or extremists, white supremacists, or existential threats to democracy. When public figures are relentlessly demonized in this kind of apocalyptic language, unstable people can interpret political hatred as a license for violence. This doesn't excuse any attacker, in my view. Responsibility, of course, belongs to the criminal, but responsible journalism requires recognizing that messaging shapes the national atmosphere. The press should stop treating inflammatory rhetoric as if it was harmless when it targets President Trump, Republicans, or anyone in our political society. Political disagreement is legitimate, but dehumanizing is not. The Secret Service must receive the manpower, technology, counter-drone authority, and institutional reforms needed to protect our national leaders, regardless of party, and that includes building the secure White House ballroom. It's not incidental that there have now been 2 attempts on presidents at the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. Fake news, I'm afraid, is beyond redemption. They must be disposed of completely in terms of their monolithic ability to set the stage for the national dialogue. But in the meantime, the threats against our president are really real. They are at a record, and therefore I urge you to join me in praying for our president, our vice president, all of our leaders, regardless of party. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Don't go away, because we'll have more hot politics on the other side. You are diving headfirst right back into the Stone Zone, the hottest political talk show on the planet today. The U.S. House of Representatives has narrowly passed a $1.15 trillion defense policy bill, but they attached the Save America Act to a package that funds the military, nuclear security, and a 3.6% pay raise for our military. They attached the SAVE Act, that is the simple provision that requires that one be a citizen of the United States and have a photo ID before you're allowed to vote in a federal election. Polls show that some 87% of the American people support this simple provision, which has now passed the House, attached to the defense appropriations, but is yet to pass the Senate. The final vote in the House was 216 to 212. And from a common sense perspective, there's a lot there to support. America must rebuild our military readiness, invest in modern weapons, and ensure that our troops are properly compensated. The bill also includes a welcome provision that actually imposes a modest funding penalty if the Pentagon again fails an audit. After 8 consecutive failed audits, taxpayers deserve accountability, and the military-industrial complex must not be given a free pass when it comes to our tax dollars. The Save America Act finally addresses the concern that only American citizens, as I say, should vote in U.S. elections, requiring proof of citizenship and photo identification is just common sense, provided lawmakers establish practical procedures for citizens who lack passports or easy access to birth records. The idea that this is somehow racist just kind of defies common sense. Now the responsibility ultimately relies on the U.S. Senate. The Senate should preserve the strongest part of this important military bill. I mean, the military readiness, the troop pay increase, but also the election integrity portions of it as well. If Senate removes the Safe America Act provisions from the defense bill while rubber stamping massive spending, that will be a betrayal of the president and his principles, and it could be a disaster for Republican chances in these upcoming midterm elections. Strong defense and secure elections are both essential. I think these issues go hand in hand. The Senate can't drop the ball on this, or the consequences could very well be dire. But we're held up by something called the filibuster rule. That means that in the Senate, you don't need 51 votes to pass a piece of legislation. I think there are 50 votes today for the Save America Act, and Vice President J.D. Vance could then cast a tie-breaking vote, and it would become law. But under the filibuster rule, and this is important, this is not a law, this is a Senate rule, essentially a custom or a tradition. It requires 60 votes to bring the Save America Act to the floor. Now, sadly, the Senate Majority Leader John Thune of Nebraska steadfastly refused to break the filibuster rule and bring this to a floor, which I think could cost the Republicans extraordinarily this November. It's time to pass the Save America Act and stop the politics. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is reaching a historic achievement in terms of defending public safety. The homicide rate across all major U.S. cities actually fell 18% in the first half of 2026 and may be heading towards a historic low. A new Council on Criminal Justice report examined 13 criminal categories in 36 cities. 9 declined. Homicides were down in most cities studied, while carjacking dropped an extraordinary 47%. Comparing that with the first half of 2019, homicides were actually down 31%. The results are irrefutable, and they're a political triumph for President Trump's law and order agenda. His administration has actually restored the basic principle that the government's first duty is to protect innocent citizens, not making excuses for criminals, not undermining the police, not allowing chaos to become normal. After years of far-left prosecutors, anti-police rhetoric, open border disorders, and soft-on-crime insanity, America seems to be moving back towards the rule of law as the public is sick of coddling criminals. Federal support for law enforcement, aggressive action against violent gangs, stronger border security, and renewed respect for police all send the unmistakable message that criminals, not law-abiding families, should fear the justice system. I think our leaders must continue supporting officers, prosecuting repeat offenders, securing the border, and rejecting radical policies that put the far-left ideology above public safety. The direction America is moving is clear. The Trump administration is fulfilling its promise and allowing American families to once again live in peace. While we're at it, we should bring back cashless bail, as is done in New York State, is a humongous mistake. Meanwhile, Trump accounts, a new federal investment program for children, which officially launched on July 4th, has already drawn significant participation. The Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, announced that more than 7 million accounts have been opened for children under 18, with roughly $1.5 billion invested so far. So about 1.7 million children qualify for the program's one-time $1,000 federal contribution. In other words, seed money put in by the government under Donald Trump will be available for children born between January 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2028. The accounts function like traditional IRAs. Investments grow tax deferred, with withdrawals generally cannot begin until the child turns 18. Parents, guardians, relatives, employers, governments, and qualified nonprofits may also contribute, although contribution limits and tax treatment may vary. Families, friends, employer contributions generally cannot exceed $5,000 annually per account. Employer contributions are capped at $2,500 per employee. Government and nonprofit contributions don't count towards the limit. Funds are invested in low-cost, diversified American stock market funds. The default option tracks the S&P 500 with additional index fund choices expected. At age 18, the accounts convert into traditional IRAs. Early withdrawals may face taxes and penalties, though, except exceptions exist for higher education, buying a first home, adoption, medical emergencies, and certain other medical costs. Trump accounts are giving children a valuable financial head start, particularly when families and employers contribute consistently. Now is the time for young families, I think, to take advantage of this revolutionary plan that will build wealth for the next generation and end the culture of dependency that fuels the continuous growth of big government. This is a perfect example of the creativity of the Trump administration. It will be in Trump's legacy the way Social Security is in the legacy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Meanwhile, a major FDA fight is going over experimental peptide treatments, is showing how the Fed bureaucracy is striking back against Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy's Make America Healthy Again agenda. An FDA advisory committee is reviewing whether specialized pharmacies should again be allowed to produce 7 peptide injections that were banned 3 years ago over safety concerns. Secretary Kennedy has argued that the restrictions push patients into a dangerous gray market, that regulated compounding with proper safeguards could offer a safer path and greater healing and health. Agency scientists oppose broader access, saying the peptides lack sufficient human data on safety and effectiveness. No final decision has currently been made. I can tell you firsthand the black market in peptides is extraordinary. I know because my inbox is constantly bombarded with clinics seeking to sell me peptides that I cannot get legally. I know people who have used peptides in their healing process. I have not chosen to do so, but that black market very much exists. The controversy here exposes a deeper battle over who controls American medicine. Secretary Kennedy has promised to challenge an FDA culture long criticized for favoring entrenched pharmaceutical interests, big pharma, limiting patient choice, and treating innovation outside the traditional approval system as a threat. Unelected, faceless bureaucrats are clinging to what's left of their closed system that protects corporate gatekeepers to the detriment of patients. The sensible path is neither reckless free-for-all nor automatic deference to the bureaucracy. It's a transparent science, strict disclosures, adverse event reporting, and carefully controlled access. People should be allowed to choose, and the FDA should not make the best unbiased information available to the masses. They should not be restricting treatments to protect Big Pharma's bloated profit margins. Kennedy must continue to push back against the FDA because their decisions jeopardize health freedom. My wife is a cancer survivor, and in all honesty, I doubt that she would now be 5 years cancer-free without alternative treatments for cancer. President Donald Trump and the Right to Try Act has been a pioneer in this entire area, and I think more and freer access to alternative medicine should be allowed. Meanwhile, New Jersey's non-citizen voter registration scandal is growing more serious as the software company blamed by the governor disputes the state's account. Governor Mikey Sherrill says that a vendor error caused more than 6,600 people who identified themselves as non-citizens to be placed on voter rolls between June of 2023 and June of 2024. Fewer than 400 of them supposedly cast ballots, but vendor IDEMIA says its role was merely to transmit motor vehicle commission data to the State Division of Elections, which remains responsible for reviewing eligibility and approving registration. That disagreement raises an obvious question. Who's actually checking the voter rolls? The state now says it will remove the registrations, replace the software, and conduct an independent investigation. But federal officials have also demanded detailed records, while the Department of Homeland Security says that a broader review identified thousands of additional registrations, potentially matching federal non-citizen records. Those larger figures remain under investigation and should be verified carefully. But the central fact is already alarming. People who answered that they are not citizens still entered the voter registration system, and some of them apparently voted. Election integrity cannot depend on bureaucrats, vendors, and agencies blaming one another after illegal ballots are cast. States need documentation of the proof of citizenship. I think reliable database checks, transparent audits, and clear accountability. Every American should want lawful voters protected and unlawful registrations prevented. That's not voter suppression. It's basic self-government. New Jersey's failure strengthens the case for the Save America Act and nationwide safeguards ensuring that only American citizens choose American leaders. Last weekend, I had Chris Jersky from the People's Audit in the Stone Zone, and he made a very good case, which is the databases of those who are deceased are readily available in all 50 states. Merely checking them against the voter rolls would determine for you who was no longer with us. There was one simple way to keep the voter rolls clean. Compare the list of those who have passed away, who are deceased, against those who are registered to vote. Seems like common sense to me. But until we have cleaner voter rolls, then you have the opening for phony mail-in ballots and other abuses. Anyway, I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Don't go away, because we'll be right back. Into the Stone Zone. Chicago's political leadership, led by the far-left socialist mayor Brandon Johnson, is moving towards a dangerous new confrontation with federal immigration law. Now, if Mayor Brandon Johnson's IQ was 1 point lower, I think you'd have to water him like a plant. Last time I looked, he had an approval rating at 6%. But the Chicago City Council has now approved a November referendum asking Chicago whether they should seek compensation from Washington for the supposed economic harm caused by last year's federal immigration crackdown. Johnson has also spoken of providing reparations to residents affected by ICE enforcement, effectively subsidizing criminal activity. That policy would turn the rule of law upside down. Operation Midway Blitz reportedly resulted in more than 800 arrests, including illegal immigrants with serious criminal histories. But instead of supporting federal officers tasked with enforcing laws passed by Congress, Chicago officials want taxpayers to compensate those who violated the law. The national implications are enormous. If sanctuary cities can demand payment whenever federal authorities arrest illegal immigrants, every law enforcement operation becomes a potential financial liability. Local politicians would gain a powerful incentive to obstruct Washington, encourage non-compliance, and portray routine law enforcement as an actionable injury. That's not an insurrection against the Constitution is what that would be. No city has a right to create its own immigration system, shield people from federal law, and then try to bill American taxpayers when the government intervenes. Citizenship, borders, and deportation policy are national responsibilities. Congress and the courts must make clear that federal immigration law applies equally, whether in Chicago, Texas, Florida, or any other jurisdiction. Rewarding resistance to the law would invite chaos far beyond immigration. A nation cannot survive when obedience to law is optional and criminality comes with a government check. Meanwhile, Congress is considering tougher restrictions on lawmakers pursuing sexual relationships with Capitol Hill staffers after another wave of misconduct allegations exposed the grotesque moral decay of Washington's elite political class. A new House proposal would prohibit representatives from having sexual relationships with any congressional employee unless the Ethics Committee determines there is no conflict of interest. Existing rules already bar members from dating their own staff or committee employees, but the proposed standard would cover staff across Congress. This change is absolutely necessary. Even supposedly consensual relationships between powerful lawmakers and junior employees carry an obvious imbalance of authority. Members of Congress control access, they can influence careers, shape reputations, and operate inside a culture notorious for protecting insiders. We already know that there is a fund from which millions of dollars have been paid out against claims of sexual abuse and harassment, but to date, the American people are not furnished with the names of the members of Congress of both parties who have transgressed and had to have taxpayers cover their tracks. What Washington elites describe as private behavior can quickly become coercion, favoritism, retaliation, or institutional corruption. Recent scandals involving lawmakers from both parties have intensified demands for these stronger rules and meaningful accountability. Congress should not require another ruined career, shattered family, taxpayer-funded settlements that hide the names of the guilty, or personal tragedy before taking action. American people send representatives to Washington to defend the Constitution and serve their constituency, not to treat public offices as a private dating pool. Congress should prohibit these relationships, strengthen independent investigations, disclose misconduct settlements, and release the names of those who have broken the law, and strip taxpayers' funded pensions from officials convicted of serious sexual crimes. The political class constantly lectures ordinary Americans about morality and workplace conduct. It should finally live under the standards at least as strict as those they impose on everyone else. Power without repercussions for lewd or foul behavior produces corruption, and we certainly have plenty of that bubbling up inside the Washington swamp. Meanwhile, the artificial intelligence race is a struggle over whether America or Communist China will control the technological infrastructure of the 21st century. China understands that dominance comes through widespread adoption. Chinese companies are releasing powerful open source models that developers, manufacturers, researchers, and entrepreneurs can download, modify, and operate independently. America must win this fight for open AI. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Roger Stone. You've been listening to The Stone Zone. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.